What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review The Boy and the Heron, a movie which conceivably might be the last feature film from Japanese master Hayao Miyazaki. However, he's retired many times in the past, and he always says, and this time I mean it. And then he goes home for a month, gets bored, starts working on a short film, starts doodling on a new feature. But the reality is he's been at the top of his game for 50 years or even longer. I mean, he started animating in the late 60s, but he started doing features in the late 70s and then founded Studio Ghibli in the early 80s. And the rest is history. But before I go any further, try and think of how many opportunities you have per year to see a new movie by one of the greatest filmmakers who's ever lived. And if you like animation, there are a lot of contenders on that front. I mean, there's so many different kinds of animation from around the world. But if you love animation, no matter who you regard as being like the 3, 4, 5 greatest animators of all time, Hayao Miyazaki at least deserves to be a contender in that conversation. And as far as I'm concerned, there are not a lot of filmmakers who have ever lived that are as consistently great as Hayao Miyazaki. Take Hayao Miyazaki on his worst day, like whatever you think his worst movie might be. I think that animated movie is vastly superior to all the interchangeable, disposable garbage that we see released on a pretty regular, routine basis here in the United States. And when you compare Hayao Miyazaki on his worst day to the latest offerings from Walt Disney, I mean, he makes his American, counterparts look like preschool children, like learning how to finger paint. He's just light years beyond anything they're trying to achieve. And thankfully, G-Kids has recognized his greatness and is not only making sure that this movie is widely available in both Japanese as well as in English because they're fucking cool, but they've given the same treatment to the majority of his filmography, which is all available on Max. I would argue it's worth subscribing to Max just to have access to all the Studio Ghibli films that are available there in both English and in Japanese. I recognize that a lot of people, when they're watching animation, they prefer to watch their movies dubbed. I'm going to urge people or try and persuade people to watch all of his movies in Japanese because I would argue the performances and just the cadence and the rhythm of the way they express themselves, it's not authentically Hayao Miyazaki unless you're watching it in Japanese. And I recognize when you're reading a subtitle, you're not getting to appreciate fully the imagery in front of you, which is why you should watch his movies multiple times, which is precisely what I did with The Boy and the Heron. I caught it in late September at the New York Film Festival, but I was so tired when I watched it, I knew that no matter what I said about it at that time, I would come to regret it. I was like, you know what? For Hayao Miyazaki, we will wait and we will see it again and we will do this right. And so now here we are a few months later with 2 screenings of The Boy and the Heron under my belt, and I'm ready to discuss it. And I can think of very few filmmakers alive on this planet where I'd be willing to watch the movie twice before breathing a word about his movies, but I think his films and his filmography command that level of respect. I'm actually working on a giant Hayao Miyazaki kind of ranked filmography video as we speak. I've got to do a few other videos first before I post that, but I've been binging the hell out of his movies and his TV shows and his shorts for the last few weeks. And I can't think of any other filmmaker where the movies simultaneously place me in this like meditative sense of calm while at the same time allowing my imagination to soar in ways that very few filmmakers are able to kind of tap into or stimulate. He just blows my goddamn mind. And each time I watch one of his movies, I just say to myself, you are so goddamn lucky that you got to be an animation fan at a time where one of the greatest animators who's ever lived was at the peak of his powers, just cranking out decades of great work. So where does The Boy and the Heron rank? Actually, before we get to that, let's just talk about what this movie's about. I'll make the pitch this way. If you're familiar with this past work, it takes a dash of Spirited Away and a dash of The Wind Rises, kind of stirs them together and gives us a new fantasy adventure tale. It's not as good as Spirited Away, and I don't think it's as good as The Wind Rises, but it's close enough. And like I said before, on his worst day, he's still one of the greatest animators who ever lived. I like all of his movies. I almost feel like I'm like embarrassing myself by showering too much praise on him, but I feel like he brings it out in me. And I'm not alone. Filmmaker Guillermo del Toro had this great line recently. I can't remember the precise words, but he says that Miyazaki's movies are increasingly becoming contemplative and autobiographical, and rather than trying to impress you with his technique, he's making really bold statements with a simple stroke of the brush. And I think that's the perfect way to describe this, because there are sequences that you can see in the trailer, especially during like certain, like the burning of Tokyo. This movie takes place during World War II. But when you see Tokyo on fire and the central protagonist is running through the flames and the image is being warped by the smoke and the heat and the flames, it's like, God damn, like He's going somewhere that he's never been before. It was reminiscent of Howl's Moving Castle, but this is brand new terrain, what he's going for in terms of capturing just the terrifying power of fire. But it is interesting seeing what topics and what stories and what styles of storytelling attract a filmmaker and bring them back to the studio when the time left on this earth is becoming increasingly limited. And he's really preoccupied with his own mortality and what he should do with his remaining time. In 2016, there was this incredible documentary called Never Ending Man, Hayao Miyazaki, and it shows what he's doing in the lead up to a short film. Can't remember what the hell it's called. It's the one about the caterpillar. Shit, I should have that written down, but I don't feel like going looking for it right now. In any event, it was his first CGI short with some kind of embellishments with hand-drawn animation. But the documentary, it really just lets you kind of like coexist with him for months on end as he's constantly talking about how old he's feeling and how he's struggling to concentrate and he's struggling to work and kind of get really like intense about a movie for long periods of time. However, every once in a while, he'll get super excited. It's like, oh my God, like we're making a movie again. And everybody describes him as a filmmaker who basically like almost like a vampire sucks all the life and energy and creativity out of all the artists that he's working with. And then he gets energized and kind of rises to the occasion again. And he's tried many times in the past to kind of groom a successor to take over Studio Ghibli whenever he finally retires, like, you know, as he always says, and this time for good. But he says that his studio, it just beats the artists to death. It just consumes them. And by the end of the production, they all feel just as old as he does. Oh, here it is. Boro the Caterpillar is the short film that was released in 2018, which I could not remember the title to earlier. And what I loved about that documentary is how he still just loves to draw like still life drawings of things that he sees around him. And you can see that informing his work. When he's drawing just a little tree for the caterpillar short, it's like he didn't have to do this. Like he could like slide that piece of paper over to somebody else and just tell them what to do. But no, he wants to draw it himself and he just loves the practice and he loves to explore his own imagination. And that attention to detail is 100% on display in The Boy and the Heron, because whether you're talking about the heron, who's one of the main characters, or some pelicans or some parakeets, the mannerisms and the personality and the detail and how aggressive they are, the way they eat, the way they interact, the birds in this have so much goddamn personality that'll just make your head spin. And so I'm not going to claim this is Miyazaki's best. I'm not going to claim that it's his worst. But if you like Japanese animation in any way, shape, or form, this movie absolutely demands your full, unbridled attention. And I apologize that I keep getting sidetracked with this video. Instead of talking about the movie itself, I was trying to introduce the premise and I got sidetracked. But it's 1943. It's a 12-year-old boy who lost his mother in a fire in Tokyo, but his father is this very powerful industrialist who's making like wings and kind of, he's basically making vital parts for jets and planes to use in the war effort. So they move out into the country where they can be close to the factory where they're making all these components. And due to a fight at school, the central character, this 12-year-old boy named Mahito, he has to stay home for a couple days. And as it turns out, the home that they've moved into is close to this, like these old ruins, these very mysterious ruins. And everything around those ruins is just kind of strange and kind of weird, including all the people. And everybody who lives and works around there knows that's a strange area to be avoided. And there's a stairwell going into the ruins that's been kind of boarded up or blocked up with some debris. And all the boy wants is to be left alone so he can grieve over his lost mother. But there's this strange heron that just keeps talking to him and like saying, like, come hither, like you're being summoned, like blah, blah, blah. It keeps beckoning him to explore the ruins. And so inevitably, the boy has to do so. And so he launches into this crazy adventure, the kind of adventure that only Miyazaki can think up, as he essentially goes into an alternate reality, one where his bloodline is intimately involved in the shaping of this alternate universe, one that was basically discovered and founded by his great uncle, I believe, but I don't know how much more I can give away without kind of spoiling the plot. But that's like the official synopsis. It's basically just a little boy during wartime goes on a fantasy adventure, and it is absolutely fascinating. But of course, everybody's going to compare it to Spirited Away because Spirited Away took over the planet when it came out, which is one of the most imaginative movies ever made. But you can't really like bash a movie or criticize a movie for not being as good as one of the greatest animated movies of all time. Although my personal favorite of Miyazaki's work is probably Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind, but we'll talk about that more when I do my full Hayao Miyazaki filmography video. But what can we say about this without giving anything away? Well, first and foremost, it's going to be going into wide release on December 8th, including in IMAX. And so I don't know how many screens in America will be playing it, but some of his movies have played, like, have generated like great numbers at the box office in America in the past. So it wouldn't surprise me if G Kids is going to go all in on the fact that this is probably the last time Miyazaki will make a feature film. So I strongly encourage everybody to hunt it down in the theater, because you'll be able to boast and brag to your grandchildren one day, I was there to appreciate the final film by one of the finest animators who ever lived. And like I said before, I'm going to recommend that people hunt it down in Japanese, although they did line up a very impressive cast for the English dub. And what I find so alluring about these kinds of movies is how in a matter of seconds they can make you feel like you're 5 years old again, while at the same time still having the wisdom of an adult. And what do I mean by that? A lot of Disney movies or a lot of American animated movies will make things so innocent and so stupid, they kind of bleed everything out of it that might appeal to an adult on any level. And it's why I refuse to see most of those movies. Every once in a while there's an exception, but in general, they just don't interest me. But it is possible to do an innocent, fantastic adventure with a little bit of edge to it, as long as you're not like willfully and deliberately turning away from the things that might imply danger or death or sadness. I mean, just the fact that this little boy loses his mother in a fire in the first scene, that's pretty grim, ruthless stuff for a child to absorb. And obviously, Miyazaki is able to make more mature films. Like The Wind Rises is obviously like a mature film by a director toward the end of his career, trying to make a movie for adults. But he can also do a movie like Ponyo, which is very G-rated, like geared towards children, incredibly innocent, incredibly sweet. And he's equally good at both. But Miyazaki recognizes the value of punctuating his innocent, family-friendly entertainment with some real violence and some real threats. Like there are these giant parakeets in this, which are so adorable in the regular world. They just kind of fly around and poop and everything. But inside this kind of alternate universe, they're much bigger and much stronger, and they like to eat people, and they've got like big knives and axes, and they're absolutely hilarious. But I'm sure like most kids, most kids are ready for this stuff, and they want to see this stuff, and they'll be delighted, and they'll laugh, and like some of their parents are like, oh my God, my child's going to have bad dreams, and they'll be covering their ears or their eyes or like trying to drag them out of the theater. Kids want to see this kind of stuff. It's actually the adults who selfishly thinking, I don't want to show my child anything that might upset them because I want to be able to sleep through the entire night without them saying they had a bad dream. But having your imagination stimulated by a master filmmaker, in my opinion, is always a good thing. And speaking of having your imagination stimulated, the imagery in this at times is just intoxicating, whether it's like, a bunch of frogs crawling all over the central character, or the flames that I mentioned from the burning of Tokyo, or just the heron's claws and the way it grips onto things. It just blows my mind how well it's able to capture the natural world, as well as like weather and wind and the ocean, but also technology. When you see a plane flying or a car driving, it's almost like the technology is alive. He imbues everything with so much life and so much vitality. And I don't know if any filmmaker has ever lived that does a better job of exploring the tension between the industrial world and the natural world. And he's not some ideologue or some fanatic for either side where he's like, oh, we got to consume all the resources and just make what we want to make. And he's not one of those lunatics that's like, well, let's kill off the human species and let the earth kind of reclaim everything. Not all of his movies, a lot of his movies explore this tension between the industrialized world and the natural world and where they collide. And I feel like he explores both with equal gusto. And I feel like Princess Mononoke is a great movie on that front. This is a good movie on that front. Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind is a great movie on that front. It's something he keeps coming back to. And obviously, he keeps coming back to flight. I mean, think long and hard about it. Has there ever been a filmmaker who's made more movies about flying than Hayao Miyazaki? And it's every kind of flying imaginable, like Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. You got gliders, and you got like giant like air fortresses, and you got all that stuff going on. Or Castle in the Sky. You got quite literally a castle in the sky, as well as like flying pirates and all that good stuff. Or Porco Rosso, and yet another movie about flying. Obviously, The Wind Rises is probably the best movie about flying that will ever be made by any human being. But he's just totally, completely obsessed with the act of flying. And while this movie's not exclusively focused on flying, there are a lot of goddamn birds in the story. And so, yeah, he gets abundant opportunities to explore what is clearly one of his favorite subjects. And in terms of the inspiration for the story, the movie's written by Hayao Miyazaki, but the Japanese title references a 1937 novel of the same name. But apparently the movie is an original story that's not connected to that novel. And it's interesting seeing how sometimes Hayao Miyazaki will do a movie based on like a manga that he's written and drawn himself. Sometimes he'll work with other filmmakers. And sometimes he'll contribute screenplays or help on the screenplay for other directors. Studio Ghibli, while it's not exclusively there to support the endeavors of Hayao Miyazaki, and there have been a few efforts where he's tried to groom successors to take over. I like the Studio Ghibli movies that are not directed by Miyazaki, but I don't like them as much as Miyazaki's movies. He is a true visionary, a rare genius. In my opinion, one of the greatest filmmakers who's ever lived, irrespective of the medium. And so I've always feel like Studio Ghibli's at its finest when making one of his movies. And I mean, they're friggin' like their logo is from My Neighbor Totoro. Like basically like their Mickey Mouse are all of his creations. And something tells me that when he moves on to filmmaker heaven, I doubt the studio will ever get together to make a movie ever again, because it seems like he cruise up and cruise down from movie to movie as needed. He doesn't just keep people on the payroll indefinitely just for shits and giggles. He hires people when he needs them. He eats them up and demands a lot from them, and then the crew disperses. And according to what I read on Wikipedia, the film apparently enjoyed a pretty successful release already in Japan. Like some of his movies in the past, at the time of their release, have been the most successful movies ever released in Japan. He obviously has legions of fans in Japan, but it came out in July 14th, 2023, and grossed about $55 million. But I'll be very curious to see how well this movie is able to compete over the next couple of weeks, because there are a lot of movies out there right now, especially Disney movies, that are underperforming. I feel like there's a unique opportunity right now for a movie like this to cut through. I just don't see it cutting through the way that some of his previous movies have. Like, I don't think that there's not the mass appeal here. I think animation fanatics are going to be enthralled by it. They'll be drooling with ecstasy as they watch this movie. But I don't picture like birthday parties of like 6-year-old kids all being dragged to see The Boy and the Heron. It's just going to be too mysterious and ambiguous and complex. And the story, without giving anything away, it's got some interesting kind of wrinkles or like some intertwining plot threads of different characters where at the end you're like, oh, I get how it all comes together. But if I were a small kid, I might be like, what in the name of fuck is going on in this goddamn movie? But just as a way of wrapping things up, because I realized the more I talk about this movie, the more I want to start working on my big Miyazaki video. And I still got a few films that I want to revisit before I do so. But if you like beautiful imagery and astonishing music and great humor and kind of disturbing violence and, you know, almost kind of ambivalent examinations of Japan's role in World War II, I just find his body of work to be unique in all of cinema. There's never been a filmmaker like him before, and there probably never will be a filmmaker like him ever again. He's one of the world's great artists, and I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice if you like animation in any way, shape, or form, and then you ignore this movie when it comes out. So forget about Wish or all that stupid Disney bullshit. Go see The Boy and the Heron, and then go see it again. And also, if you prefer to watch movies dubbed in English, see it in English, and let me know what you think of all the actors and their performances. But I'm going to urge everybody to see it twice. Hell, see it in Japanese and in English. But see his movies, and also subscribe to Max, because I think everything going back to Castle in the Sky is available there. Nausicaa, I can't remember if Nausicaa is available on Max or not, but Castle of Cagliostro, you'll probably have to hunt down on Amazon. And a lot of his TV shows from the 70s are well worth hunting down as well. Even if you just watch like the title sequences on YouTube, they're just absolutely delightful. So I'm an animation freak. I love and adore his movies. I always will. So it was a pleasure and a privilege getting to review one of his movies as it came out, because it's been 10 years since The Wind Rises, and I did not have a YouTube channel or a podcast at the time of that movie's release, and I just rewatched that last night, and I couldn't believe how fucking good it was. I've been kind of sleeping on just how good The Wind Rises was, because like I was tired when I saw that as well, because it was at the end of a 24-hour all-night film festival, and I just didn't give it a fair shot. But having watched it now in the proper frame of mind, The Wind Rises is one of the greatest animated movies that I've ever seen. So go watch that too. Watch all of his movies and decide for yourself which of his are your favorites. But I am rambling at this point. It's time to wrap this sucker up. So please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Hope everybody enjoys The Boy and the Heron. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.